Great. Thank you all for joining. Before we start, if you can kindly mute your microphones. So you can kindly mute your microphones. That will be great. That will avoid us from hearing noise in your background. This session is being recorded. So kindly know that this session is being recorded. So your views are being recorded. And if you do not want your face to be seen, you can put your camera off when you're speaking. And we do want to hear from you. So if you have questions, please put it in the chat box. We also want to know where you're dialing in from. I've seen that Justice has said she's coming in from Ghana. So if you're joining, do let us know where you are dialing in from and your organization. That will be great. So good day once again, wherever you may be joining us from the Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific countries. My name is Irene Dankwa, and I'll be your moderator today. So we know that young women and men will make up most of the African, Caribbean, and Pacific regions' populations in the coming decades. Therefore, these young women and men need to be part of the process, i.e., the policy making that shape their future. Public-private dialogue, or PPD, is an approach to policymaking that brings together government, the private sector, and other relevant stakeholders. It helps governments all over the world incorporate the view of the private sector when developing solutions to many of the challenges they face, which will include poverty reduction, national competitiveness, and inclusive growth. Unfortunately, young women and men and the associations that represent them are often excluded from PPD. So today we are going to look at what seems to be the issues, how can we resolve it, how can we build capacity, how can we ensure that the voices of young women and young men in Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific countries are included in our policy making process. But before we start, I'd like to know how well you know this topic. So we are going to run a poll. Quickly let us know how well you know this topic. So a poll is going to come up. Let us know how familiar you are with this topic. So I see that we've got quite a few people. We've got people from the Pacific joining. We've got people from Africa joining. Sure, people from the Caribbean are joining. So this is great. Every region is being represented in this call. So thank you so much for responding to the poll. I will quickly go on to our agenda while we are here today, just to let us know what it is we should expect today. So for our agenda, we will have our lead researcher, Jackie, present the IC report. Then we will hear from the EU and then the OACPS on the work that they are doing in relation to youth participation in public-private dialogue. After that, we will have a panel discussion. We have three of our panelists. It promises to be exciting. We also want your questions. So throughout the presentation, do put in your questions. We'll be looking at it and we'll be answering that. Then after the panel discussion, we'll go into the breakout room where we'll look at real life cases. How do we resolve this? And we'll all come out with solutions. From there, we'll wrap up and we'll say goodbye for the day, but we'll continue on the conversation. So this is the agenda for today. It promises to be exciting. I'm looking forward to the discussion. I will hand over to Jackie Bassett, who is the lead researcher for this report, to present us our findings. So over to you, Jackie.
Thank you, Irene, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you all, wherever you may be in the world. Personally, I am sitting in somewhat sunny Edinburgh, so I am sending you all warm Scottish greetings today, and thank you very much for joining us. As Irene has mentioned, I am Jackie, and I'm the author of the report that we're discussing today, on a topic that is very close to my heart: youth inclusion. In this case, how we can promote young people's inclusion in public-private dialogue. Just quickly on my background, I have spent 25 years, plus actually more than that probably, working in the field of cross-cultural relations and international development. I specialise in youth and women's empowerment and in international education. And I would actually just like to take the opportunity to formally thank the ICR Facility and Challenges Group for giving me the opportunity to study and write about this very important but actually very under-researched topic. So without any further ado, let's crack on with our discussion. I'm just being asked to save something on a techie side here. That looks like it's done it. So if we can move on to the next slide, please, Doreen, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, so what are we going to cover today in my discussion? We're going to keep the focus quite simple and look at 4 key things. Firstly, let's look at what we already know about the rising youth population in the ACP region. And by the way, I just want to say at this point that I may throughout my presentation use the shorthand of region. I am fully aware of the fact that we're talking about a very, very different part of the world. We've got Africa, Caribbean and Pacific Island, huge differences between them, but it is shorthand for my presentation. So you'll forgive me for the broad generalization and hope you'll realize from the report that it's much more nuanced. Secondly, we will highlight why youth tend to be excluded from PPD and what the reasons are for that. Then on the flip side to it, consider what the benefits are if they are actually included. And then finally, and for the bulk of my presentation, we'll explore how we can change things. What 7 of the key findings and recommendations are from my report. So I hope that is all going to be okay for you. Do feel free to give me a wee thumbs up in the emojis as we go along. And as Irene has already mentioned, if you've got questions, if you've got comments, add those into the chat too. And our colleagues Irene and Doreen will capture them as we go along. We'll have an opportunity to address those in the Q&A a little later as well. Right, let's go on a little journey around some key facts about youth and PPD. And we'll start with what we know. So we all know, right, that there are rising youth populations across the ACP region, and that this youth bulge presents huge demographic dividend. According to the African Development Bank, harnessing the potential of Africa's youth population could add up to $500 billion to the continent's GDP by 2030. The United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific estimates that the Pacific Islands youth population presents a sizable opportunity for economic growth that is yet to be realised. And for the Caribbean, UNDP estimates that a 10% increase in youth employment would actually result in a 1.2% increase in regional GDP. Okay, so we know this. Policymakers know this, governments know this, and they are responding too. Many governments have published policies to address the youth bulge. Around about 2/3 of ACP countries have published general youth policies, and several also have national action plans on youth employment. At a regional level in Africa, the African Youth Charter commits African Union members to several measures in relation to socio-economic inclusion and employment for young people. Great, we all say, job done. Except, even with the existence of these youth policies, according to the Commonwealth Youth Development Index, global trends are showing that youth participation in traditional political structures has declined. There is disengagement with traditional political institutions, which many young people feel are not responsive to their needs. There is increased political polarisation, and we're seeing a growing distrust of authority and a lack of opportunity for young people's participation in the traditional routes of policymaking. However, what we are seeing is that young people are not actually completely disengaged, far from it. And as a World Bank report on youth and civic engagement has shown, they are actually increasingly likely to engage in new modes of civic and political participation, such as social movements, protests, and other political movements. And then just to sort of end our little journey around what we already know, we also know as a backdrop to all of this that PPD, public-private dialogue, that brings together multiple stakeholders from government and the private sector is an approach to policymaking that really works. It has shown that it can provide a structured, participatory, and inclusive approach to policymaking that develops solutions to the challenges that many countries face. So, why do youth tend to be excluded from it? If we know it's a good vehicle for policymaking and the youth bulge is so important for our future economies? Well, there are many reasons for their exclusion, and Doreen, you might want to just click one more time on the slide. There's some annoying animation on here that needs to come in. Let's look at the reasons for exclusion first. Number one, institutional barriers to youth participation. Many PPDs are designed to bring together established, large-scale businesses and government representation, okay? They are often seen as the most influential and most powerful stakeholders in the economy, and youth-focused business associations may not have, or be perceived to have, the same level of importance in terms of their expertise and their experience, their financial resources, and their political influence. So it can actually make it very difficult for them to get a seat at the table. Secondly, limited skills and knowledge, or in other words, youth human capital. So due to poor access to education, limited opportunities for quality training, which is particularly true for marginalised youth populations in some countries within the region, it can hamper their ability to effectively contribute to shaping policies and engaging in the decision-making process. So even if they do get a seat at the table, actually being able to be effective at the table is sometimes in question. Number three, and this is a biggie, societal barrier to youth participation. There are several societal reasons why young people are often not listened to in PPD processes. Cultural norms often place little value on youth voice and prioritise the authority and the opinions of elders. And these factors severely limit young people's ability to influence within PPDs and really contribute to the policies that are affecting their lives. And finally, it is really important to note that the lack of participation of young women in PPDs is particularly common. And in fact, the ICR Facility has commissioned another report entirely dedicated to this subject. So Irene or Doreen, perhaps if you have an opportunity, you could add the link to that into the chat as well. But it's safe to say that entrenched...
Hello, we can't hear you, please.
Oh, hello? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you, Jackie. Yes.
Okay, I think perhaps someone on the line's finding it difficult to hear. I will carry on and hope that at least the recording will pick up my voice, and if anybody's struggling, they can go back to that. But I was just rounding off on my point about female representation. Safe to say that entrenched social norms, the burden of unpaid work, and a host of barriers that women face in business is at the root of why this is happening. Okay, that is the bad news, guys. Okay, we're going to get a little bit more positive now and look at what the benefits are when youth are actually included in public-private dialogues. There's an African proverb which I've included in the report that says, "The one wearing the shoes knows exactly where they hurt." And I like that. And I think it sums up that the involvement of young people in PPD ensures that their perspectives and their needs are understood, and that more relevant and more effective policy can therefore be designed. Better decision making. Research by the ILO has shown that greater diversity and inclusion of different voices actually leads to better decision making. And that's because diverse groups, they bring a wider range of perspectives, of experiences, and of ideas that can really enrich dialogue and promote innovation. Better planning, management, and implementation. When young people are involved in the decision-making process, they're actually more likely to be engaged in the implementation of policies as well. So it can lead to greater compliance and a more successful outcome. Economic benefits. We've touched on this already, but youth-led and youth-focused businesses have huge potential to drive economic growth, particularly in sectors such as technology and innovation, and specifically through micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, which are often at the moment excluded from PPD discussions. Trust building, basically incorporating young people with government, with the private sector, can be a significant step towards brokering trust. And in engaging young people in the policy making today, it's basically ensuring that it's empowering them to shape their future as well, and to trust that institutions have their future at stake. And then finally, innovation and change. Young people are familiar with emerging tech. They have first-hand experience of modern challenges, and you'll often find that they bring really innovative ideas and fresh solutions to discussions and decision-making. So they can really inject vitality and diversity into these conversations. So, with so much at stake, and so much that young people can bring to the process, we're going to look at some recommendations. And I have 7 that I'll walk you through from my report. So the 7 recommendations. Thank you, Doreen. Number 1, policymakers must recognise the value of youth involvement and demonstrate genuine commitment to integrating their perspectives in decision-making. Now, that may sound obvious, but it is so crucial that the involvement of young people in PPD and wider political decision-making moves beyond symbolic representation, and that governments, policymakers, and the private sector show genuine willingness to listen to them, to support them, and to give their voice weight. Now, as you will see from those of you who have read the report, you will see from the case studies that one commonality emerges where there is success, and that effective youth representation is greatly enhanced when there is a recognised mandate from government and there is strong political will around inclusion. And I would highlight one case study in particular, the one on Senegal's National Youth Council, as a great example of that. So if you dip into the report and read that case study. I think that really shows this point and brings that to life. Recommendation 2, concentrate on their areas of concern. This is another one that may sound obvious, but it's actually one of the most critical, I would suggest. What are the most pressing issues for young people in your countries? Have you asked them? Or are policymakers the ones who are making assumptions that they know what matters to young people? Reach out, ask, engage. And remember that although there are many areas of common concern across the ACP region, again highlighted in the report, so things like unemployment, access to finance, environmental concerns, the really critical thing is that PPDs adopt a context-driven approach, and that you're considering your local or regional labour market needs when you're coming up with topics for discussion within PPDs. Doreen, could you go on to the next slide for me, please? Thank you. Recommendation 3. Empower youth and youth-focused associations through capacity building, network support, and engagement. So my report focuses on youth-led business and trade associations as the main vehicle for engaging with young people through PPDs. But that can take many, many different forms. And there are lots of different ways that these associations and organisations can come into a public-private dialogue. It might be that there's a youth body established within an existing organisation, such as a Chamber of Commerce. So you may have a youth wing or a chapter, perhaps. Or it might be that there is a specific, dedicated youth trade association, such as a Young Entrepreneurs Network. Either way, the first recommendation is that these forums are identified, and if they do not already exist, then within your local context, help to create them. Then ensure that they're supported and strengthen their capacity. Now, I would say that when I spoke to youth business associations during my research, that this was one of the most common requests that I heard. Provide training and support. Now, there is a list of 8 of the most commonly requested areas of support in my report, but they include advocacy training, communication skills, how to win funding, and training on technical terminology, so that when these associations and these young people come into PPD discussions, they can talk the same language in policy discussions as everyone else. Such a simple thing, but something that can make a huge difference from an inclusion perspective. And then finally, on recommendation 3, help with fostering networks and coalition building so that these associations can strengthen their influence and advocate more effectively for the things that are important to them. Recommendation 4, enhance youth participation through targeted outreach and inclusivity. It goes without saying that youth are not a homogenous group, okay? But if we're going to be serious about inclusion, then it is critical that we involve everyone. So please, seek out those harder to reach groups. Develop targeted outreach programs that recruit from diverse backgrounds, not just within urban centres and cities, for example, but outside of there as well. Ensure that you have a gender balance. Now, again, this is an area really close to my heart, but it's not just about numbers, okay? So it's not just about ensuring there's equal numbers of male and female participants. Make sure that women are given equal roles. So they are facilitators, chair people, spokespeople within a PPD as well, and ensure that their areas of concern are up for discussion as well. It may differ to what men within the room are finding important. And then finally, think a little bit about your methodology and how you run things. So ensure that meetings are at accessible times, they're in locations that work for everyone. Maybe consider childcare, and try to ensure that proceedings are jargon-free and as accessible to all as you can make them. Doreen, next slide, please. Thank you. Recommendation 5. Foster effective communication and transparency with youth in PPD. Now, this point is true for all participants of PPD. It is not just youth, but it's very important to understand the purpose, the scope, and the limits of their involvement. So manage expectations through transparent communication about what can be achieved and, importantly, what cannot be achieved. What is it possible to change? What's in scope? What's not in scope and is not going to happen? The number of times that I have spoken to young people who have been invited to take part in dialogues and had come with great expectation about how they could influence change, and then only to be disappointed when they found it didn't come to pass. So transparency is key. Digital. There's always a lot of talk about digital technology when we're discussing engaging young people, and it definitely opens up new avenues for engagement. For a start, you can use online meeting platforms like we are today. You can use online survey tools, but do remember that there is still a digital divide, and that can also pose a barrier to inclusivity. Not all young people have access to tech, and especially those in rural areas, the more economically disadvantaged groups, and again, women. They can be easily excluded through digital means as well. So it's not a panacea. Recommendation 6, drive effective implementation of outcomes. So similarly to the previous point I made about managing expectations, this recommendation is also one that came up time and time again in my interviews for the report. And this is about moving beyond the dialogue to implementation. Many of the young people I spoke to expressed frustration over their participation in PPDs that then lacked the implementation of the reforms that they had discussed, or they simply didn't hear about what happened after their involvement. So there wasn't any communication of results. So it's worth remembering, and again, I'm stating the obvious here, but it is worth remembering that the ultimate objective of PPD is not just dialogue, but it's about the achievement of tangible results. So to all the policymakers out there, and to all of those responsible for implementation, please be accountable, move forward with the outcomes that have been agreed in discussions. And we all know, we live in the real world, we hit barriers, some things aren't always possible to implement in the end, but communicate your progress. Keep people informed, and never ever underestimate the importance of communication. And finally, my last recommendation, Doreen, if you would mind, thank you. Assess your impact and continuously improve. Now, this is one of my favorite recommendations because I am a geek and I like nothing better than a MEL framework, which I got to write about in some detail in the report. But the point is, create feedback mechanisms. Ask how things can be improved. Monitor your progress on the outcomes you agreed, and remember that the power of data and information is very real. It's only with that that you have knowledge and that you can continue to improve your policy making and engagement through PPD in the future. So there we have it, my gallop through 7 key recommendations and findings from the report. And I'll leave you with one final comment, which was made by a World Bank senior economist, and I think nicely captures the essence of today's discussion. And that quote is here, I'll just read it to you. We need to understand the real concrete problems young people are facing and what real concrete steps we can take to help them alleviate some of those problems. This means making youth-serving agencies and young people themselves a part of the conversation. So thank you. And a little reminder for those of you who haven't managed to read the report yet, Doreen, if you can flip to the final slide, there is a link. There's a link there, so you can download the report there. And please, my contact details will be in the chat if you do have any follow-up questions, both today but ongoing as well. I'd be very happy to answer those. Irene, thank you.
Thank you so much,
and
Jackie.
Doreen, thank you.
Thank you. Great, great, great. I've been looking through the chat. If you have questions, do put it in the chat. But I want to say that this report was brought to you by the Investment Climate Reform Facility, which is a facility that supports countries and regional institutions in Africa, the Caribbean, and Pacific states in their public-private dialogue process to create a more inclusive and sustainable investment climate, and mainly focusing on women economic empowerment. So what the ICR facility does is it responds to technical assistance requests that's coming from public agencies, private sector organizations, development finance institutions, looking to reform their business environment to enable sustainable growth, especially those that support women economic empowerment. The ICR facility also strengthens national and subnational development finance institutions in countries so that they can provide the investment that African, Caribbean, and Pacific enterprises need, especially women-owned enterprises. And this report, like I said, was compiled by the ICR facility led by Jackie and Challenges. And what we do is we compile such reports and we share such findings to enable the discussion to ensure that evidence-based business environment reforms are being implemented. Our funders are the European Union, the Organization for Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific States, BMZ, that's the German government, and the British Council. Today, we have 2 of our funders joining us to provide us comments on the report and what it is they are doing. We will start off with Miguel Cambo-Lupis, who is the policy officer at DG DEVO, DG Impact Unit E2. That unit oversees the microeconomic analysis, investment, climate, private sector, trade, and employment. So I invite Miguel to give us his comments on the report.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect, good. So good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Miguel.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. No, so I was saying thank you, Jackie, and thank you, Irene, for the presentation, and thank you, Jackie, for the report. Indeed, it's a very interesting report that Jackie has done, and it's very much aligned with the policy that we support in the European Commission. So let me briefly introduce myself. There's a bit of a mistake there on the slide, because DEVCO is what we used to be called. Now we're called IMPA. IMPA stands for International Partnership. And
I think we've lost you, Miguel. Yeah. Okay, I think we've lost Miguel for a moment.
Too bad for Miguel. We're hoping he could be back soon.
Yes. All right. So maybe whilst we wait for Miguel, we will take the comment from the Organization for Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific States, Anthony Brad, who is the MSME expert at the Secretariat of the Organization for Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific States. So maybe Anthony, you can give us your comments, and once Miguel rejoins, we take his comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Irene, and thank you, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Secretariat of the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States, also known as the OACPS, it's my utmost pleasure to participate in this launch of the ICR Facility Youth Participation in Public-Private Dialogue PPD report. Today, we mark an important milestone in our collective efforts to amplify the voices of our youth and drive inclusive economic growth in our member countries. And I extend warm greetings from our Secretary General, Mr. George Rebello Pinto Chikoti, and Assistant Secretary General, Mr. Junior Lodge. The OACPS is an intergovernmental organization representing 79 member states across 3 continents, has always recognized the crucial role that young people play in shaping our societies and economies. It is evident that the youth are not just the leaders of tomorrow, but are the leaders of today. Their energy, creativity, and innovative outlook are invaluable assets that can drive sustainable development if harnessed effectively. This report sheds light on the importance of youth participation in public-private dialogue, or PPD, as a critical mechanism that enables government, civil society, and the private sector to collaborate and shape policies and strategies for economic development. By engaging young people in these processes, we empower them to directly address the challenges they face, offer fresh perspectives, and contribute to policy decisions that directly impact their lives. In the context of the current global challenges, including COVID-19 pandemic and the pressing issue of climate change, it becomes even more urgent to tap into the potential of youth. The resilience and adaptability are essential to building back better, and also creating sustainable, inclusive economies. The report which we've been presented today explores successful examples of youth involvement in PPD across our member states, showcasing best practices, challenges, and recommendations to harness the full potential of youth engagement. So today's launch signifies our commitment to promoting youth participation in public-private dialogue across the OACPS countries. And we're confident that providing young people with the platform and tools to engage meaningfully, we can unlock their innovative thinking and foster an environment where their voices are heard, valued, and acted upon. It is therefore with great pleasure that I express my gratitude to our development partners at the European Union, the German Ministry of Development, BMZ, who have funded the ICR Facility program, and of course the ICR Facility implementation partners from GIZ, the British Council, Expertise France, and SNV, and all the stakeholders, particularly Jackie, who has developed this report, and all the stakeholders who have collaborated on this report, including government officials, youth representatives, civil society organizations, and private sector partners. I know that this report has already been some time in development, so it's very good that we are able to receive it today, and that we have such participation from across all the OACPS regions. I see people from my home country, Trinidad and Tobago, are online, and of course people in Africa, people in the Pacific as well, who are joining us here today. It's through your dedication and expertise that have been instrumental in ensuring the quality and relevance of this report. So what we look forward to is for embracing the spirit of collaboration and inclusivity as we work towards implementing the recommendation that's outlined in this report. And we look forward to joining forces and empowering our youth to drive sustainable economic growth, leaving no one behind. Thank you again for providing this report to us that we will all take to our best wishes and to our best knowledge, and that we will share throughout the region, the OACPS regions, and together let's shape a future that truly reflects the aspirations of our young people. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. And it's great to hear that the OACPS will be carrying forward their recommendations. And like Anthony indicated, there are more than 10 countries represented from from the Africa, Caribbean, Pacific, and Europe regions. So there's a diverse audience here. Do send your questions, look through the chat. You might want to connect with someone. I mean, there are questions coming in, and some of the questions I want to direct to the panel. Once Miguel rejoins, we will take comment from him. But so as we wait for Miguel, we can move into the panel. Today we have an exciting team of three people. One of the questions that came up was, can you give us an example of how this is being done? And I think that my panel will be able to answer this question. So we have Shadron Collins, who is the General Manager for Youth Business Trinidad and Tobago. Ruth Namachanja is also on the call. She's the youth chairperson at the Central Organization of Trade Unions in Kenya. And we have John McCove, the founder and executive director for Now Youth Development Actions. So if you can all come on camera and then we speak to that will be great. Thank you. So Shadron, I will start with you. I mean, if you could just let us know what the Youth Business Trinidad and Tobago does. We want to know what it does.
And thank you. Good morning, afternoon, good evening, whatever time zone you're in. Thanks, Irene. Now, Youth Business Trinidad and Tobago, our main core focus is empowering young persons to build profitable and sustainable business. One of our strategic focus is that whole sustainable entrepreneurship. How can we get responsible entrepreneurs? And even part of being a responsible entrepreneur is advocating for the needs of other entrepreneurs, as we speak about it from there. I'm also the chair for Youth Business Caribbean Steering Committee for 2024. So I'm also going to introduce a couple of things that in the conversation from a Caribbean perspective in what we do.
So do you facilitate direct engagement between youth entrepreneurs and policymakers? If you can share any successful examples, so that was one of the questions that came up, any successful example of such platform or initiatives.
Great. Well, success is always subjective, right? So I do see our role in Youth Business Caribbean as entrepreneur support organization really is that bridge between the entrepreneurs that we support and the public sector that we engage with. So our role as collectors of information from the entrepreneurs and disseminators to the public sector is very vital. So one of the things that we usually do, especially when you think about our organizations in Barbados, Dominica, and Trinidad, we kind of have a good relationship with the Ministry of Youth and also the Ministry of Finance. So every year when budget comes around, we always are engaged in terms of what policies or recommendations can we offer to the government in terms of the next year. One of the things that we found works best for us is really engaging our entrepreneurs. And I'll talk about the challenges after, but engaging the entrepreneurs in pre-budget consultations. Not simply, yes, you can send out surveys, but I really think the core meat of it is having those focus groups and being able to translate what the entrepreneurs are seeing as their core problem. And I think Jackie would have called it the concrete problems of the entrepreneurs, and being able to translate that into what does a policy that can address those problems look like. So every year, we always come together, look at the surveys, speak to the couple of entrepreneurs to get a little more definition, and as a collective, create those recommendations to the government. The challenge that I indicated before is that as a bridge, it's difficult for you to see the end result of what happens. What we have seen over the years is a direct change in the government policies. We've seen direct changes in government agencies that were there to support entrepreneurs, but now actually focusing on supporting youth entrepreneurs. I think that is what we see as success for us. Not just taking the information, but also the changes that we've seen year to year in terms of more organizations, more government organizations in particular, coming out to support young entrepreneurs.
Thank you. Thank you, Adrian. I will bring Ruth in here now. still on examples, Ruth, in your role as youth chairperson from the Central Organization of Trade Union Kenya, how do you ensure that the union's outreach efforts are inclusive, they are reaching a diverse group of workers, including the younger demographic? I think we just had one example from Shadron, so if you could also share that, that would be great.
Sometime back, if you look at youth involvement in the trade union movement, it was quite challenging for young workers within the trade union leadership structures and decision-making bodies. So at the Central Organization of Trade Union, in 2016, the youth really rallied and campaigned to have a youth structure within the trade union so that it can address the issues of the youth. So we managed to have a youth structure that was adopted by the board of directors. And the youth structure, we have regions. So we've spread out in different regions that are being coordinated by the headquarters office. So what we do to ensure that the youth are really participating in the regions, we've identified vocal young workers. And remember, our Central Organization of Trade Union has been affiliated with diverse trade unions of different sectors. So we ensure that there's a youth committee in place, and participation of the workers within the committee has to be sensitive to distribution of young workers within that region. So we managed to roll out a campaign so that we have youth committees in place. And our youth committees in place also, we had to ensure that at the national level, we also have the broader structure that will amplify the voices of the youth in the trade union movement. So as we speak right now, we have a national youth committee in Kotu, Kenya, where now I sit as the chairperson. And we managed also to make sure that we've been accorded a youth desk that is fully functional. So we have a youth desk that also ensures that activities of the youth are being implemented and the youth are the beneficiaries of the programs. And that also we have key youth leaders who sit also in the executive board so that as we influence decisions, then the voices of the youth are also considered. So that is the structure that we have. And as the youth department now, we ensure that we mainstream youth agenda. When we talk about the youth policy, we have a youth policy in place. When we talk about also speaking rights in the board, something that we've really pushed for so that we have our voice, then our representatives in the executive board also make decisions that fit the intentions of young workers. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ruth. Great examples from Shadron, great examples from Ruth. John, I want to hear from you. You know, as Executive Director of the Nile Youth Development Actions, how did you structure private dialogues to ensure meaningful youth participation in AFTA? You know, AFTA is a big thing, it's on the continent, and we want to know how you structured, you know, private dialogues and to ensure that there's youth participation in the AFTA policies and initiatives. So over to you, John.
Thank you very much, Irene, for giving me the opportunity. And I bring you a greeting from the land of great abundance, that is the Republic of South Sudan. And I also would like to take the opportunity to congratulate the ICR Facility in launching the report on youth participation in public-private dialogue. As I represent the Nile Youth Development Action, it's an organization that is focusing on advancing the local socio-economic development of the youth in South Sudan and across the Nile Basin countries. We do that through continuous engagement in policies, dialogue, and promoting meaningful education and entrepreneurship in those countries. One aspect that we advocate about sadly is the African Continental Free Trade Area. It's a big agreement that is flagship project of Agenda 23, and it look at intra-Africa trade. It means how African can trade among themselves. And our question was, what does it have for young people? We have heard, yes, it's a big tech. It covers $3 trillion of market, but we said, okay, the cake is too big, but what is it for young people? So this is the basis of starting engaging the policymakers to give young people a platform to discuss how they can be meaningful part of the AFCFTA. And we had a couple of activities with the policymakers, especially the leaders who are championing the African Continental Free Trade Area, including the head of the organization, His Excellency Wamkele Mane. We were among the first youth organization to have a dialogue with him, to interview him and question him on how young people can be part of that. And the key positive intervention was that the African Continental Free Trade Area was not meant only for cooperation. It has a way that it engages young people in small and medium-sized enterprises. It also engages women and youth. And by then, it also resolved to initiation of a protocol on women and youth. And we are glad that that protocol it's recently adopted by the head of the state and government of the African Union. That is a good thing. But along the way, in the last 4 years, young people were engaged in a way that they want to understand those continental agreements because it gives them a way of sending the goods and services across the continent. Means you can sell your goods and services in other countries. Example, if you are in Kenya, you can be able to trade with someone in Ghana, and if you are in Nigeria, you can trade with someone in Egypt. And this is the aspect that we were hoping to gain from this agreement. So we managed to engage young people meaningfully in that discussion. And we are not resting until the young people are part of it, a driver of this continental trade. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, John. And we have excellent examples. It all sounds great and all that. So the question this is for you, Shadron. Are there challenges at all, that young entrepreneurs or young workers face when they are engaging with policymakers? I think you touched on it briefly, but, what are the challenges and how has the YBTT addressed these challenges? Do you have stories to highlight these?
So, I mean, I kind of spoke to a couple of them in the previous. I think one of the main aspects is that young entrepreneurs, their voices are overshadowed by larger organizations because at a policy level, the government may try to address the problem of entrepreneurship or the problem of business. But young entrepreneurs, and I think Jackie have alluded to it before, they can't be lumped in one as one group, but their voices are are seen as so small. How do you now bring those voices to the table? Because you can't bring all of them, right, to the same table and expect to be heard. Because one of the biggest challenges that entrepreneurs have, they see their individual problems with their business. So translating that into what is a problem that the sector is having, it's also difficult. So one of the things that we usually have to do is meet with our entrepreneurs in groups, whether that be by sector, whether that be by age, but kind of as a collective, as a group, figure out what is that particular problem affecting our agri-entrepreneurs? What is that particular problem affecting persons from that 20 to 25 years age limit, right? What is that problem? And then we can group that problem by that particular aspect. And because we have large numbers, their voices now become larger, put together as a collective and say, this is what 500 entrepreneurs told us, right? So they can now match the workforce of one organization that might have 500 employees. So understanding that aspect and bring that collective together is one of the things that we thrive to do. One of the aspects that we tackle is through training and mentorship. We realize that a lot of entrepreneurs don't understand their core problem. So if you, and I think the default is now to send surveys. If you send an entrepreneur, a young entrepreneur survey, What is your biggest challenge? They may end up just putting funding. Now, funding can be a whole stream of different problems. It could be finding access to markets, so you're not getting the right customers to fuel your business. It can be access to grants. It could be access to opportunities. So it's only having that deep dive conversation which organizations like we see in our representatives here can do. This is where the bridge is important, to help deep dive in those entrepreneurs, figure out from them and help them understand what their core problem is so that we can translate. Two other aspects, and I'll end with those last two. One is confidence, right? Confidence to speak up. Advocacy is not an entrepreneurial skill that you naturally develop, right? You have to develop that skill set, right? And I mean, advocacy, I always say it's not sexy. So persons aren't outright saying, I want to be an advocate for entrepreneurship, right? They may want to be an advocate for their business. So who's going to do the dirty work? And I think that is what's also important. Developing trust, and I think in the report, they spoke about the declining of traditional participation, right? Developing that trust with our entrepreneurs is also important. How do we develop that trust? It's the end-to-end results. Yes, we're collecting information from them, but how can we connect the information that is collected to the actual policies that we see implement? Because only when you see that happening, you can say, yes, my voice is being heard. And if my voice isn't being heard and it's being overshadowed, and I see all these different policies, but it's only there to support big businesses, why am I going to contribute next year, right? And that's the work that we have to put in. How do we build that trust, build that bridge, and connect the dots for the entrepreneurs? This is what the information collected by those 500 entrepreneurs, and this is the policy changes that we're seeing happen, right? So it's connecting the dots.
Thank you so much, Shadron. The next 10 minutes for questions from the audience. There's no questions. It looks like the explanation from the reports from everyone is clear. So I'm going to continue with my questions, and this time around I'm going to go to Ruth. In Shadron's presentation, he did. If you have a question, please put it in the chat. So if you have a question, do put it in the chat box, and I'll read it. So Sharon did mention mentorship, did mention advocacy. I want to know whether your organization, whether there are specific programs and initiatives that you put in place to develop and to mentor and empower young workers to take leadership roles within the labor movement, or to advocate more. Are there specific programs and initiatives from your organization?
So this is for me, right?
This is for Ruth. Yeah, no, this will be for Ruth. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
As we struggle, organizing young workers, who most of them do not find labor movement attractive, especially with emerging trends in the world of work. We understand, platform workers. We know there are, employers are having new, forms of engaging workers on temporary basis. So even going for young workers, they see like a labor movement, is not a priority for them. But how again do we ensure that our recruitment process is active, and that young workers are, we are retaining them in the labor movement, as we even look around, mentoring them and molding them to become leaders within their respective trade unions. So we rolled out a mentorship program that is purely under our youth desk, and we gave it 2 phases. So we ran it in different cohorts with we did needs assessment just to find out what do the youth want. How do we make it even attractive to retain them and to make them participate all the way to taking up leadership positions? So we rolled out a mentorship campaign that we actively train young workers on even trade unions. Because one of the challenges that we realized is that even as they transition from, from institutions of learning to employment, the gap within understanding just the labor concept and the importance of them unionizing. So the mentorship campaign addresses now the deficits within that transition phase. So what is it that they will get, the benefit of them engaging in the union? Then how can they again grow within the labor movement? Within the labor structures, we have leadership at the industry level. How can we mold them to even become leaders outside the industry level? That is now the employment environment. So our mentorship session looks into that transitioning. And as they get into the sessions now, we go even further to look at what are they benefiting from it all. So we introduce the labor concept, just getting to know what is a labor union. Get them to understand, besides just getting to understand the labor union, then what are your rights within the labor movement? Rolling out, advocacy campaigns so that they can also know how, as they grow and us being a pressure group, then how can they fit within the system? So, and also looking at just beyond labor, mental states, work, being, employee relations at the workplace, because even as we take them through the session, there are those who will fall out of employment. Then where do they fit? Getting into the informal sector. So where do they fit? And in our in our selection process, we do not discriminate, because we allow even those that are not in employment to be part of the mentorship session.
Yeah.
So as we go about, sorry.
So just in terms of you mentioned including making sure that everyone is included. So as you go on, if you could highlight how you ensure. I mean, Jackie did talk about gender inclusion, how there's a lack of women representation. So just as you wrap up, can you also tell us how you are ensuring that women are part of the process and how you are measuring that? Yeah.
Yeah. So the youth desk does not work in isolation. There's also a gender desk that is also has gone through the same process that the youth, participation and youth involvement underwent through. Like they also have a representation at the national level, then at the regional level. So we do not work in isolation. So they also on board part of our session, because there's also a specific discussion on gender. And when we go about recruitment of workers to join the committee, a gender representative is a position that we've put it like it's mandatory for as we think about selecting workers, then we should have women who fit into the gender role. And we ensure that there's also equality in representation. So in the committee, there's a balance on gender, so that as we push around, youth issues, then we have the women also supporters. So the mentorship also goes hand in hand for the youth and the women. So they also have a mentorship whereby they recruit now young female workers to be part of their mentorship session. So as we look at both genders, the women then take up the next gender. And then something else that happens in that process, after you pass the youth, after you passed through, the youth age, so you are immediately recruited into the women mentorship session, so that you continue with being mentored to become a female leader within the global movement.
All right. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Ruth. Youth decks, women decks, women focal points are some of the things I picked up. Now, within 1 minute, I'm going to bring you back, John. You seem to have been able to shift the conversation from dialogue to implementation, with the work that you've done with AFTA and all that. So how do you how do you shift from dialogue? Because sometimes it just remain at a dialogue session. How do you shift from dialogue to implementation? So John, if you can within 1 minute tell us, that would be great. I've seen that questions are coming in, and some of these questions will be answered in during the breakout room, which will be soon. So John, do come in. Thank you.
Yes, Irene, I believe the youth engagement should not be only tokenistic, right? There has to be implementation in that. And the effort that we have done with other youth across the continent, it bear fruits because we do have now dedicated protocol on the African continental free trade area that is dedicated for youth and women. That is a big win for us. If we did not advocate it for youth inclusion, it might not be heard by the policymakers. Secondly, and I believe one of the convening forum that was held by the AFCFTA, especially on the youth symposium, it was also the effort of the youth across the continent to advocate for the inclusion. Not only that, we also ensure that young people are engaged at the national level, where we coordinate and give them information, because some were not aware about the African continental free trade area. They were not aware of it. And we took the effort of taking it out there to young people and how best they can engage through the national coordinated committees that are based in their countries. And surprisingly, some young people were not aware of that there are such a institution in their own countries. So we were able to link young people to those structures, and most of them are aware of that. If they want to get a certificate of origin for their products, they can easily access those information. And we still use the digital connectivity to help each other on how best we can benefit from that agreement. For us, those are a success. And as I mentioned earlier, we are not resting. We want to finish the race, and the race is youth empowerment, not only through public and private dialogue, but meaningful engagement, where they are also decision makers and they make a good out of the continental agreement that exists in the African continent.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, John. In 20 seconds, can you sort of tell us how you assess the impact and outcomes of the things you do in terms of youth inclusive in just like 20 seconds? How are you assessing it?
Numbers. If we talk about numbers, I think we have good numbers of young people across the continent. And from our last assessment, the young people that are aware about the African continental free trade area are more. It is not now a strange thing for them. It is something that they are familiar of. And that is a measure of success.
Okay, so one measure how many young people in your country are aware of the policies in place. So that's one to check whether you're creating impact. Shadron, how are you doing that in Trinidad?
I think a good measure for us is how often the words youth entrepreneurship is actually mentioned in the budget, right? So a good part of our feeder is into the annual budget, where the government has recommendations and policies. So how are we tracking how many of these policies are directed at youth entrepreneurs, and are they increasing year to year? And that's a good measure for us.
So budget. So when the government reads the national budgets, look out for how much has been allocated for youth work. Great. Ruth, I'm bringing you in for Kenya. How are we doing that? Ruth, I don't know that Ruth, you can hear us. Okay.
She's muted.
Ruth, I think you're muted, so if you can come off mic. So we have awareness of policies, budget allocation.
Could you say that again? Because I think I'm having network.
Yeah, I wanted to know how you are measuring whether young people are being included in the process. Shadon mentioned budget allocation. John has mentioned awareness of policy among the young people. So any one last point, and then we end the session.
also involvement of youth from diverse sectors, because one of the challenges that we've had is we've left the informal economy where we have a majority of young workers who are thriving in different fields. And also the focus has been in the formal. So that is also an area that we are trying to see how they can also be involved. Yeah, besides the budgetary allocations, involvement in in meetings and all that. But the critical element is also on what are the youth getting out of all, even in allocation of funds and the procedural way of engaging the youth in this is still quite.
Great. All right. Thank you so much. So these are examples of how you can measure whether young people are indeed being included in the public-private dialogue process. We have 4 breakout rooms to go to in 10 minutes. We have further questions there in the breakout room. So on your list, so in the breakout room, we are looking at how do we empower youth associations through capacity building. So if it's something you want to listen to, that's room 1. Room 2, how do we enhance youth participation through targeted outreach and inclusivity. Room 3 is driving effective implementation of the youth PPD. And then room 4 is impact measurement. So room 1, we'll have Shadron lead in that group. Room 2, we'll have Ruth. Room 3, we will have John. Room 4, we'll have Jackie, my colleague Maraika, and Lynn in there. If you're a French speaker on this call, I will encourage you to join room 4 because we have French interpretation in there. So SOC will bring out the various options for you to select the room that you would like to join, and then we'll be back here in 10 minutes to wrap up. Thank you. Great, thank you all. I think we are all getting back into the main room. Do put up your microphone, mute your microphone so that we don't hear any feedback. Thank you all for, I'm sure there was great discussion in my room. We talked about how we can use youth participation through targeted outreach. The use of TikTok and Instagram did come in. I'm sure that for all the rooms too, there were lots of discussions. Since we are just at the top of the hour, we are going to share the notes that came out from the breakout room in a follow-up email. So at the end of this webinar, we will send you the link to the webinar. We'll send you the link to the report. We will also share information coming from the breakout room. There were questions that we couldn't get to. Those questions will be identified and we will ask the panel to also provide feedback. So in that email that will come, expect the PowerPoint presentation, expect the link to the recording, the link to the report, questions to the answers you've asked, notes from the breakout room, and then there will also be a feedback question. And we want to know whether this was useful to you. Tell us, give us more information. We have other webinars coming up next month and in subsequent months. Do visit the ICR website. For more information, there are lots of reports that we've written. Jackie did mention there are lots of reports we've written on women economic empowerment, on innovative finance, on youth economic empowerment. So there are several reports that's climate smart investment. There are several reports that we've written. Do visit our website and stay in touch. We are on LinkedIn. Do follow us so that you get updates. Send us an email. People ask, how do we contact the panel? They can put their contacts in the chat, or you can also find them on LinkedIn. So you can follow them on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for joining. I've learned a lot from the discussion, and we look forward to continuing with the discussion even after today. So do expect an email with lots of information, link to the recording, link to the report, link to the PowerPoint presentation, a note from the breakout room, and then the feedback question. Do please, when the feedback questionnaire comes, do let us know. I think a link was also put in. You can fill it out right now and let us know whether we were supposed to improve something or not. Thank you so much to Jackie. That was an excellent report. We all enjoyed it. There was great feedback in the chat. Thank you to Miguel and to Anthony for joining us and giving us comments. Thank you to Shadron, to Ruth, and to John. This was a very, very engaging discussion. And participants. It was very engaging in the chat and in my breakout room, and I'm sure it was with everyone. So thank you all for joining today, and we hope to continue discussion. Until then, see you at another ICR event. Bye-bye.